I don't normally talk about mundane astrology or politics and tend to focus more on the psychological and evolutionary aspect of astrology, but what's happening in the skies right now is simply too important to ignore. The United States is approaching its Uranus return. This is something I've mentioned in a lot of videos, but I've been wanting to make a video explicitly about this Uranus return, some of the other aspects that it's coinciding with, and most importantly, what we can do about it during this time. The next 2 to 3 years are poised to bring radical and maybe even explosive change. And as someone who has ties in the Middle East and now lives in the US, I feel very intertwined in everything that's happening in the world right now, and so is my body. Actually, a few days before the US got intricately involved, I had a resurgence of my chronic pain that I healed last year. And I was very confused about why that came up and what I was doing. And I tried to sit with it as I do and listen to the language of my body. And then soon after we got involved, and even for days after that, I was kind of confused as to why my chronic pain was still coming up from time to time. And I remembered that in 2019, 2020, and in 2022, 2023, when there were massive protests happening in Iran, I also had very severe flare-up of my pain. And when your ancestry is so deeply rooted in a place of the world like mine is, where most of my family is almost 100% Persian, then it's no wonder that my body feels it before I even do. And this is why it's so important to learn the language of your body. But regardless, there's so much grief and uncertainty in the air. And I also believe that this is a time of purpose. And so this video is here to give you clarity. It's here to give you context and calm, not to create fear, also not to ignore what's happening, but to remind you that the skies are calling us to pay attention and not to panic. We're in a moment that asks us to show up, to stay grounded, and to remember our power. And if that seems hard right now, I get it. And we're going to walk through this together. Well, let's start with the basics of what a Uranus return is. Well, Uranus return is when Uranus, or any return, is when a planet returns to the same point that it was in the birth chart and starts a new cycle regarding themes of that planet for whoever holds that chart. So in this case, it'd be the US chart, who has Uranus at 8 degrees of Gemini. And we are currently moving into Uranus in Gemini on July 7th. This cosmic event marks a period of significant change, freedom, and a potential reevaluation of one's life path in a shocking or disruptive way. For the United States, this is in Gemini. And Uranus in Gemini is arguably one of the more chaotic positions for Uranus. And I talked about this in my Uranus Gemini video a little bit, and I plan on talking about it more because this is going to be a long transit, about 8 years on and off, because it's going to go back into Taurus. But we're heading into this 84-year cycle of Uranus return. Uranus returns every 84 years. Between 2026 and 2029, with the exact position of it being in 2027, but it's going to be within orb for about a few years. And we're going to be feeling it as Uranus moves into Gemini, and even right now as Uranus sits at 29 degrees of Taurus, a very karmic, unstable culmination degree of 29 degrees, the anaretic degree. This isn't going to be a one moment event. It's the beginning of this new 84-year cycle. But while Uranus is in Gemini, this is going to just be more apparent to us. The last 3 times Uranus returned to this point were, of course, when the birth chart started for the US, which was 1776, during the American Revolution, in which Pluto was also in Aquarius during that time. And then again in the early 1860s, just before the Civil War, and also in the 1940s, which coincided with our involvement in World War II. So I was about to say World War III. And Neptune was also in Aries during the Civil War. So these were all periods of massive upheaval, reinvention, and rebellion. And you're seeing that beyond Uranus and Gemini, we also have Pluto and Aquarius. We also have Neptune and Aries. So once again, these are kind of markers for times of disruption and war and upheaval collectively. And Pluto and Aquarius, especially all over the world, and we're just talking about the US right now. So there's a lot of energy to disrupt, and Uranus is a planet of disruption, but also of innovation and liberation. When Uranus returns in a nation's chart, it cracks open outdated systems and exposes what can no longer be sustained. Now, I already mentioned that the Uranus return will be exact in 2027 and that the energy is already building, but what I'm really looking at is July 2026 when we have Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. Now, natally, the US has Mars in Gemini as well, so this is going to be the Mars return for the US as well as the Uranus return, and they're coming together in Gemini. And all of this, like, honestly, you guys, this is what astrology is so amazing for. It's to seek patterns in the sky and then bring them into our daily lives and figure out how to do that. And then the healing beyond the stars happens with what we do with that information, which I've talked about extensively in all of my videos. Now, these patterns never look exactly the same. So even though we're seeing that these transits have happened before and certain things have happened, we can't say that's going to happen exactly the same way. But what we can say is there can be unrest, there can be chaos, there will be tension. And the revolution this time around, in my opinion, is going to look very different because of our availability of technology. And, you know, I'm thinking a lot of cyber crimes, a lot of misinformation, which makes it very, very important to be very discerning about the information that you're intaking, who you're intaking it from, and what you're doing to back up that research. So it's no longer a time of just listening to what other people are saying, but rather making sure that you're very aligned with your inner compass, which is why I do this with my clients. And I talk about this on my channel. It's so important for us to have some sort of an anchor internally, because we're entering a time period where there's going to be maybe a war of ideas. AI interference. Connection to this inner compass is really going to allow you to be able to navigate these changes in a way that feels good to you specifically, because starting 2027 as well, I mean, this is just the craziest thing, is that not only does astrology show us that there is massive outdated systems that need to change, but human design shows us as well, because of the prophecy of 2027, when we have a global frequency change, which is something that happens every several hundred years or so, and it's happening in 2027. And I've talked about this at length, and I have a video about it too, but it's pretty much moving from tribal systems to the self. And one thing that I really see with Uranus moving into Gemini, especially for the US, is that I do see some states wanting to get more autonomy from the federal government. And I also really feel like what's happening out in the world is trying to kind of centralize a sort of global government. And regardless of who you listen to, whether it's spiritual people who've been saying this for decades, or economists who are also postulating that America is no longer going to become the front-facing power dynamic that it has globally, that it's going to be split up. And some economists definitely disagree, whether it's China or other places, but that they are kind of moving towards this multifocal global power dynamic versus America just being in front of everything. And America has just finished its Pluto return. Some could say that we're still in it. And Pluto returns take about 248 years. And there's a lot of evidence and history to show that around 250 years is how long a dynasty can last, or an empire can last. Obviously, that number is not precisely 250 years, but it is kind of aligning with this fact that there is a loss of power happening here in some way, in a global sense. In my opinion, this is kind of a psychological tactic too, what's happening right now with all this chaos that's happening in the world, which is something that abusers often do, which is they create a lot of chaos that they create, and then they come in and they offer a solution and they fix it, and then they look like the saviors, when in fact they were the people who instigated the chaos anyway. So when I'm looking out into the world and I'm seeing all this chaos, I'm trying to really remain grounded in understanding that who is creating chaos, and not in a blaming sense of saying like, oh, it's this country or this country, but rather recognizing that it's these governments that are creating the chaos. Pluto in Aquarius has a lot of people fighting about ideologies, and I talked about this with Pluto in Aquarius when I did the video on it. It's very common for this to happen, but Aquarius rules the people. And so if we recognize that it's not the people against the people, but us against these bureaucrats who are always doing things based on what they want to do that we're not even privy to, right? Like things get leaked years after and we understand what it was, and it was never about weapons of mass destruction or whatever. People believe that. And in the moment, we never really know what's happening. And some may say that we never will know exactly what the purpose is. And so to not get so caught up in that, and this is coming once again from somebody who has a lot of ties in the Middle East and a lot of family there, it's on one hand, like holding that grief and the sadness and the pain. And then on the other hand, recognizing that the more that we step into duality, the more that we suffer. And we'll talk about this a little bit more at the end of the video. So why talk about this now? Well, we're already seeing the signs, the political instability, the war, battling of ideas, division, civil unrest. When Mars, the planet of action, anger, aggression, conjoins Uranus in July 2026, it can really trigger these even more volatile events in the months to come even. So the fact that this is happening during the USA Uranus return, and while Pluto is Aquarius, it's no small thing. And so I really want to speak to the nervous system of the collective, which is already in a massive state of dysregulation. And these astrological movements simply mirror that. We're in a time where old systems are collapsing and new ones haven't yet taken root. And when we're talking about these new systems taking root globally, it takes time. It takes a lot of time. And I've even said with this frequency change in February 2027, according to human design, it's not going to be an overnight thing at all, right? This is something that's happening globally, collectively. So no wonder we're experiencing so much chaos, because we're experiencing a crumbling of these massive institutions and these massive systems that are simply outdated. This is all, in my opinion, a part of a cosmic plan that we may never understand. And isn't that life? As much as we try, we will never fully understand why things happen the way they do. We are moving from serving the tribe in human design to serving the self, which is why when I talk about some of the things that we can do, some of these things get really important, because when we move into this energy of serving the self, connection becomes more difficult and more important at the same time. But the purpose of this video isn't to predict doom, right? I'm not here to prove, oh, look, astrology knew what's going to happen. It's to prepare you for the inner revolution that's possible, because these transits are calling for an awakening, not a withdrawal. Astrologically and archetypally, Uranus in Gemini invites radical rethinking of truth, of information, of communication, education. Collectively, we're being asked to break free from rigid ideologies and tribalism, to unhook from mass programming and reclaim our minds and our bodies. And personally, it's about becoming your own authority, trusting your own unique voice, and being willing to be different, even if it's uncomfortable. So what do we do with all of this that we're holding and that we're being asked to hold during this time? First, regulate your nervous system. This is no longer a luxury. This is an act of revolution in itself. Breath work, somatics, taking time in nature, conscious rest, doing shadow work. All of this helps you stay really resilient. Astrology can help us understand our design. So can human design. And we can recognize from that what tools we need best during these times, or work best for us during these times. And those are the things that I do with my one-on-one clients. I'm doing much more than just telling them what their life is about, which is a part of my job as well, and part that I love and I find really fascinating. And also I see this position that I'm in to be able to help people not just remember those aspects, but to reconnect to them and to once again reclaim their inner authority. The second that I kind of was touching on before is connecting to community. Pluto in Aquarius is shifting our focus to networks, not these hierarchies. We need each other more than ever. Finding your people is so important, and building connection with others is so important. And when I talk about finding your people, how do we do this without alienating or blaming other people? There's a great quote from Bertrand Russell. He says, "When you hate, you generate a reciprocal hate. When individuals hate each other, the harm is finite. But when great groups and nations hate each other, the harm may be infinite and absolute. Do not fall back upon the thought that those whom you hate deserve to be hated. I do not know whether anybody deserves to be hated, but I do know that hatred of those whom we believe to be evil is not what will redeem mankind." This is touching on the essence of non-duality. The more we maintain duality in our lives, such as this is good, this is bad, I'm right, they're wrong, the more we are stuck in a subjective reality and a subjective spirituality, and the more that we suffer from this. I don't have the time to fully explore it in this video, but just sit with this quote and this idea of non-duality. Because when we tend to the war in our hearts, we can deepen our understanding of the chaos and tension out in the world as well. And last but not least, to create, whether that's art, a local project, a conversation, creation is an act of resistance. I talked about this in my Uranus and Gemini video, that the cure to the pain of consciousness that humans have is creation. Give of yourself to the collective. Your story matters. Your art matters more than you know, especially during this time. You don't have to save the world, but you can tend to your corner of it with intention and care. And that's all we can focus on during this time, because the rest of it is just simply being aware of what's happening. And once again, not being ignorant and staying informed, but not letting that rule and control our every action, because that's how they want us to feel. They want us to feel overwhelmed. They want us to feel in a constant state of shock and therefore being frozen or running into fight or flight and fighting the person that we see when it's really not about them. As we head into this time, remember that we were born for this. I believe that every soul alive today chose to be here, and we're not here to collapse under the pressure. We're here to awaken something ancient and powerful within ourselves. Thank you for being here. If this video resonated, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Please subscribe to my newsletter and follow my Substack. It's just getting started, so it's a little slow, but who knows what's going to happen with social media, and newsletters are the best way for us to keep in contact with one another. So subscribe here on YouTube as well for more astrology, human design, tarot, collective healing content, so many things that I'm really passionate about, somatic wisdom especially, of course. And remember that no matter what happens, you are the center of your own sky. How will you tend to it? I'll see you guys next time.